The evening it all began felt unusually quiet. Emily was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed in a way that suggested she wasn't just killing time. I was at the dining table, sorting through bills, the low hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. Everything seemed normal, yet something in the air felt off. After a few minutes of shifting in her seat, Emily put her phone down and turned to me. "Ryan," she started, her voice measured but oddly rehearsed. "I've been thinking a lot about us." I looked up, pen still in hand. Her expression was serious, but there was a strange energy behind it. "Thinking about what?" I asked, sensing this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. She hesitated for a moment before leaning forward slightly, clasping her hands together. "I think we should consider opening up our marriage. You know, exploring new horizons." The words hung in the air, heavy and surreal. I blinked at her, unsure if I'd heard correctly. "Open our marriage?" I repeated slowly, watching her face for any hint that she was joking. She wasn't. "Yes," she said, her tone soft but deliberate. "I don't mean this in a bad way. It's not about us having problems. I just think it could be good for us. A way to grow as individuals and as a couple." Her words were polished, too polished. It sounded like she'd been practicing this, maybe even rehearsing it in front of a mirror. I stayed quiet, letting her keep going. "It would all be transparent," she continued, her voice brightening as though she was trying to sell me a vacation package. "We'd set boundaries, of course. It could even bring us closer." As she spoke, pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The late nights. The constant texts she never shared. The new perfume that didn't seem meant for me. Was this about broadening horizons, or was she already exploring them? My gut clenched, but I kept my face calm, my tone neutral. "Interesting idea," I said, leaning back in my chair. Her expression shifted, just slightly. I could see she hadn't expected me to react so easily. "Really?" she asked, her voice lifting slightly in surprise. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a grin. "In fact, there's this girl at the gym. She's been pretty friendly, flirty, even. Maybe this could be fun." For a moment, she froze. Her smile faltered, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Jealousy, discomfort, maybe even regret. She quickly masked it with a weak laugh. "See? That's the spirit." But her knuckles tightened around the edge of the couch. She was picturing it now, wasn't she? Me with someone else. And it wasn't sitting well. I stood up, stretching as casually as I could. "Well," I said, keeping my tone light, "this could be an adventure." Without waiting for a response, I walked into the kitchen, leaving her with her thoughts. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger and resolve coursing through me. If Emily wanted new horizons, I'd let her chase them, but I'd make sure she felt exactly what it meant to be on the other side of the fence. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the role Emily had unknowingly cast me in. If she wanted an open marriage, I'd give her one, on my terms. I wasn't about to confront her head-on or lash out. No, this would require patience, subtlety, and just the right amount of misdirection. The first step was planting seeds. At breakfast the next morning, I casually mentioned the girl from the gym again. "She's funny," I said between bites of toast. "Always cracking jokes about how I'm her gym husband. You'd like her." Emily stiffened but quickly recovered. "Sounds nice," she replied, her voice light, but her eyes stayed focused on her coffee mug. She was trying to play it cool, but the way she pressed her lips together told me she wasn't as unaffected as she pretended. By the end of the week, I began adding small touches to make my story more believable. A faint trace of floral perfume on my shirt collar, something I picked up from a department store sample. A lipstick-stained napkin left carelessly in my gym bag. Nothing too obvious, just enough to make her wonder. Each time, I watched her reactions carefully. She never confronted me, but I noticed the way her eyes lingered on the napkin or the faint tension in her jaw when she caught the scent on my shirt. One evening, I left my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while I went to shower. When I came back, it was sitting slightly askew from where I'd left it. She didn't say anything, but her smile was tighter than usual, and her laugh felt forced when I told her a joke during dinner. It didn't matter if she found anything on my phone or not. Her mind was already doing the work for me. Then came the piece de resistance. Lisa, my coworker. She was a good friend, someone I trusted, and I knew she'd be willing to help with my plan. I explained everything. Well, almost everything. Lisa agreed to send a few playful texts and call the house occasionally, acting just flirty enough to sell the illusion. The first time Lisa called, Emily was in the next room. I made sure to take the call in the living room, keeping my voice low but not too low. "Hey, Lisa," I said, chuckling at nothing in particular. "Yeah, tomorrow sounds great. Same time? Perfect." When I hung up, Emily entered the room under the guise of grabbing a book. "Who was that?" she asked casually, her tone so even it was almost suspicious. "Just Lisa," I said, shrugging. "We've been grabbing coffee after work lately. She's fun to talk to." Emily's expression didn't waver, but the flicker of jealousy in her eyes was unmistakable. "Lisa," she echoed, feigning disinterest as she sat on the arm of the couch. "Yeah, you've met her," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Remember at the Christmas party? She brought that weird fruitcake no one wanted to eat." "Oh right," Emily said, forcing a smile. "Lisa." That night, I caught her staring at her phone, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. She didn't notice me watching, but I could guess what she was doing. Looking Lisa up on social media, trying to find answers to questions she wasn't ready to ask me directly. This was just the beginning. I wasn't just going to let Emily set the rules of the game. I was going to master them. And judging by her growing discomfort, I was already well on my way. Over the next week, Emily's behavior changed in subtle but noticeable ways. She kept up her usual routines, chatting at breakfast, asking about my day, but there was an edge to her tone. Her laughter felt strained, and she avoided meeting my eyes for too long. At dinner one evening, she asked about the gym. I could tell she was fishing for something. When I mentioned Lisa's name in passing, she gripped her coffee mug a little too tightly and nodded with a faint, forced smile. Her unease grew as I added small touches to the act. The faint trace of floral perfume on my collar didn't escape her notice, nor did the lipstick-stained napkin I left in my gym bag. She didn't say anything, but her gaze lingered on those details longer than she likely realized. Later in the week, I accidentally left my phone on the counter, unlocked, with a text from Lisa deliberately left unread. "Had fun chatting today." Smiling face with smiling eyes, looking forward to Thursday. When I returned to the kitchen, Emily was scrolling through her own phone, but her posture was tense, and her eyes flicked toward mine before she quickly looked away. Her questions became sharper. One night, as I returned from a supposed phone call with Lisa, she hovered in the doorway, her arms crossed. Though she didn't outright accuse me of anything, the tension in her body spoke volumes. She commented on how I seemed to be texting more lately, her tone casual but her expression anything but. Her discomfort was almost tangible when I mentioned Lisa joining my Thursday class at the gym. By now, she was actively trying to downplay her jealousy, saying things like, "That's nice," with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She even floated the idea of coming to the gym with me, a rare occurrence. "Maybe it's time I tried," she said one evening, though her tone lacked conviction. The next day, she conveniently found a reason to skip it, but her restlessness only seemed to grow. One evening, while I folded laundry, she finally confronted me, not with an accusation, but with a careful question. She lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly, before asking if I had been feeling distant. Her voice was steady, but her unease was evident in the way her gaze darted toward my phone. I looked up and met her eyes, calm and controlled. "You're the one who suggested this arrangement," I reminded her, my tone neutral but deliberate. Her expression faltered, her cheeks flushing as she looked away. Whatever response she had planned seemed to evaporate, and she left the room without another word. Watching her retreat, I knew I had shifted the balance. Emily had wanted to play by new rules, but now she was starting to feel the weight of them. Emily's facade continued to crumble over the next few days. Her movements became more deliberate, her questions less subtle. She was trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping through her fingers, and I could tell it was eating at her. One morning, I caught her glancing at my gym bag before I left for work. She didn't say anything, but her eyes lingered as I zipped it shut. The faint trace of suspicion on her face was all I needed to see. At work, Lisa helped me take things up a notch. She sent a few playful texts during lunch, ensuring that the notifications would pop up just as I knew Emily was likely glancing at my phone at home. "Can't wait to chat more later." Smiling face with smiling eyes, Lisa's commitment to the act was flawless, her playful tone matching exactly what Emily feared. That evening, I walked through the door with a faint smile on my face, as if I'd had an excellent day. Emily was in the kitchen, pretending to chop vegetables, but the tense set of her shoulders gave her away. "You're in a good mood," she said lightly, not turning around. "Yeah," I replied. "Busy day, but good. You know how it is." Her hand slipped, the knife scraping awkwardly against the cutting board. She muttered something about being distracted and returned to her work, her movements slightly jerky. The tipping point came the following weekend. I made a point of heading out early on Saturday morning, mentioning that I had plans at the gym. I made sure to leave my phone unlocked on the counter again, with a fresh message from Lisa previewed on the home screen. "See you soon. Too hot." When I returned home, I noticed Emily had barely touched the chores she'd planned for the day. The laundry sat unfolded on the couch, and her laptop was open to what looked like social media pages. Her face was flushed, and she avoided my gaze. "How was your morning?" I asked casually, setting my bag down. "Fine," she replied, her tone clipped. I let the silence hang for a moment before dropping the next breadcrumb. "Lisa says hi, by the way," I said, feigning nonchalance. "She's thinking about organizing a group dinner with some of the gym folks. Should be fun." Emily froze, her hand tightening around the edge of the table. "Oh, yeah," I said, leaning against the counter. "She's great at bringing people together. You should come sometime." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned back to her laptop. I could practically see her mind racing, trying to decide if she should ask more or let it go. That evening, Emily broke her silence. She brought up Lisa again, her words measured but laced with tension. "So, you and Lisa seem to be spending a lot of time together." I raised an eyebrow, pretending to be puzzled. "She's just a friend," I said. "Why? Is something bothering you?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, visibly frustrated. "No, it's fine," she said eventually, but the flush in her cheeks told a different story. Emily didn't realize it yet, but she was unraveling, one thread at a time. The same open marriage idea she'd pitched with such confidence was now the source of her discomfort. And the more she tried to bury her jealousy, the more it showed. The tension in the house was becoming impossible to ignore. Emily's attempts to act casual were crumbling, and every small detail seemed to weigh on her. I caught her watching me more often, her eyes following me as I moved through the house, as if she was trying to catch me slipping up. That week, Lisa helped me escalate things just a bit further. We planned a lunch outing during work hours and made sure to post a group photo online, with Lisa and me standing just close enough to raise questions. I left the house that morning with a cheery, "See you later," while Emily sat stiffly on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual. Later that afternoon, when I came home, Emily's demeanor was off. She greeted me with a distracted, almost forced smile, and I noticed her phone screen lighting up repeatedly. It didn't take much to guess that she'd seen the post. "How was your day?" she asked, not looking up. "Great," I said, keeping my voice light. "Busy, but good. Grabbed lunch with a couple of folks from work, you know, the usual." Emily nodded, her movements stiff. She set her phone down face up on the counter, something she never did, and I caught a glimpse of an open text thread. Her friend Darcy's name was at the top of the screen. I could only imagine what they'd been discussing. That evening, as I was putting away my gym bag, Emily approached me, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Ryan, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. I looked up, feigning surprise. "Sure. What's up?" Her tone was measured, but I could hear the crack in it. "I've noticed. You've been spending a lot of time with Lisa. And it's not just me. Darcy mentioned she's seen the posts too. It feels like more than just a co-worker thing." I leaned back slightly, keeping my expression calm. "Lisa's a good friend, Emily. And isn't this what you wanted? To explore?" Her face flushed. "It's not the same," she said quickly. "I didn't mean," she cut herself off, as if realizing she'd said too much. "Oh," I said, tilting my head. "Not the same? How so?" Emily's eyes darted away, her hands gripping her arms tightly. I just think we should talk about boundaries again. This feels off. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, then nodded slowly. Boundaries, I echoed. You're right. Maybe we should revisit them. For the first time, Emily seemed to falter completely. Her confidence was gone, replaced by a mix of frustration and guilt. She opened her mouth to speak again, but no words came. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving the conversation unfinished. I watched her go, a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation building in me. Emily was starting to crack under the pressure of her own choices. She had set this entire situation in motion, and now she was realizing just how unsteady the ground beneath her had become. The following morning, Emily was quiet. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee, staring out the window while I made myself breakfast. The air between us was heavy, charged with the tension of the previous night. I let the silence stretch, giving her space to bring up whatever was weighing on her. When she didn't, I decided to nudge things forward. Lisa's organizing a dinner this weekend, I said casually, breaking the quiet. It's just a small thing, some gym friends, co-workers. She invited me to join. Emily's head snapped toward me, her expression carefully neutral, though her fingers tightened around her coffee mug. Oh, she said after a pause. Are you going? I shrugged, pretending to consider it. I don't know yet. I told her I'd think about it. Her reaction was subtle but telling. She pressed her lips together, nodding slightly as if the conversation didn't bother her. But the slight flush in her cheeks and the way her gaze dropped to the table betrayed her discomfort. That's nice, she finally said, her voice quiet. I didn't push further, letting her stew in her thoughts. The seeds had been planted, and I could already see them taking root. That afternoon, I left for work, making sure to spray just a touch of the same floral perfume I'd used before. When I came home, the scent still lingered faintly on my shirt. Emily noticed immediately. Long day, she asked, her eyes briefly scanning me as I set my bag down. Yeah, I replied, playing it cool. Busy but productive. She didn't press further, but I caught her glancing at me several times throughout the evening, as if she were trying to piece something together. Later, as I watched TV in the living room, Emily sat across from me, scrolling through her phone. Her thumb moved slowly, her expression distant. I could tell she wasn't really paying attention to whatever was on her screen. After a few minutes, she set her phone down with a quiet sigh. Ryan, she began, her tone hesitant. Do you think this open arrangement is working? The question caught me off guard, but I quickly masked my surprise. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice even. She hesitated, then shook her head. I don't know. It just feels different than I thought it would. I leaned back on the couch, studying her carefully. It's not what you expected? She met my gaze, her expression conflicted. No, I thought it would be freeing, but it feels like something's off. I nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Well, we're still figuring it out, I said. Maybe it just takes time. Emily didn't respond immediately. She looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. Whatever she'd hoped to gain from this conversation, she didn't seem to find it. That night, as she lay beside me in bed, I could feel the weight of her turmoil in the silence. She shifted restlessly, her breathing uneven. For the first time, I started to see just how deeply the cracks were spreading. Emily was beginning to confront the consequences of her choices, though she wasn't ready to admit it yet. And as much as she tried to maintain control, her growing unease was making it harder for her to hold everything together. Emily's resolve was unraveling. Over the next few days, she avoided eye contact, her questions about my whereabouts more frequent but less direct. She moved through the house like she was preoccupied, distracted by thoughts she couldn't suppress. One evening, I deliberately stoked the tension. While scrolling through my phone at the dinner table, I chuckled softly and typed a quick reply. It was a meaningless text to Lisa, but the timing and my reaction were deliberate. What's funny? Emily asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. Oh, just Lisa, I said, not looking up. She's always cracking jokes. Emily froze for a second before resuming her meal, her fork scraping a little too hard against the plate. Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, Emily stood in the doorway of the bathroom, watching me. She had her arms crossed, her expression uncertain. "Ryan," she started, her voice quieter than usual, "I need to know something." I turned to face her, brushing my teeth to give myself time to prepare. "What's on your mind?" I asked after spitting out the toothpaste. She hesitated, her fingers tightening on her arms. "Are you seeing her?" "Lisa, I mean." The question didn't surprise me, but the vulnerability in her voice did. For a moment, I considered my response carefully. "Emily," I said evenly, "you're the one who suggested we explore new things. Why does this bother you now?" Her face flushed, and she looked away. "I didn't think it would be like this," she admitted. "It feels different when it's real." I dried my hands on a towel, stepping closer to her. "What feels different?" "You wanted freedom, Emily. You wanted us to grow. Isn't this what you asked for?" Her shoulders slumped, and she avoided my gaze. "I just didn't think it would feel like this," she murmured. I could see the cracks fully forming now, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. For weeks, she had clung to the idea that this arrangement would liberate her, but now it was clear she hadn't anticipated the emotional fallout. "Emily," I said softly, "if you're not happy with how things are, we can talk about it. But I think we both need to be honest about what we're feeling." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there. That night, she lay silently beside me, her back turned. I could feel the tension radiating from her, her breathing uneven. She was struggling, but I wasn't going to fix it for her. This was her mess to untangle, her decisions to confront. Emily had wanted to rewrite the rules, but now she was realizing how much she had underestimated the consequences. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't the one left wondering where I stood. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Emily hovered around me constantly, her attempts to act normal crumbling under the weight of her growing unease. Her eyes followed me as if she were waiting for me to slip, her every move charged with suspicion. One evening, when I came home from work, she was sitting in the living room, scrolling aimlessly on her phone. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Busy day?" she asked, her voice clipped. "Not too bad," I replied casually. "Just meetings and lunch with Lisa and some co-workers." Her grip tightened on her phone. "You've been spending a lot of time with her." "She's good company," I said with a shrug. "It's nice to have someone to talk to." Emily's jaw tightened as she forced a weak smile. Without another word, she got up and headed to the kitchen. I heard the sharp clatter of dishes being put away, louder than usual, and knew she was stewing. Later, as we sat in stiff silence watching TV, she turned to me abruptly. "Ryan, can we talk?" I muted the show, giving her my attention. "Sure. What's up?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of the couch cushion. "This open marriage idea," she began slowly. "I think it was a mistake." Her words hung in the air. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It just doesn't feel right," she said, her voice soft. "I thought it would be freeing, but it's not. It's hard. And I feel like we've lost something." I studied her, letting her words settle. Her vulnerability was raw, the confident facade she had worn for weeks now completely gone. "You wanted this," I said evenly. "I agreed because I thought it's what you needed." "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I didn't think it would feel like this." I leaned back, keeping my tone neutral. "So, what now?" She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling. "I hate this. I hate thinking about you with someone else. It's killing me." Her admission wasn't surprising, but hearing it aloud hit differently. The freedom she'd wanted, the idea of exploring new horizons, had crumbled the moment she faced the reality of her own choices. "Emily," I said softly, "this was your decision. You opened the door. Now you're upset about what you found." Tears streaked her face as she looked at me. "I didn't know it would hurt this much," she whispered. I sighed, standing and heading toward the kitchen. "We'll talk more later," I said over my shoulder. "You need to figure out what you really want." I left her sitting on the couch, tears silently falling. Emily had reached her breaking point, forced to confront the consequences of the path she had chosen. The tension between us had settled into a heavy, unspoken weight. Emily avoided me more than ever, retreating to the bedroom early or leaving the room whenever I entered. Her confidence was gone, replaced by hesitation and visible guilt. I waited patiently, knowing she'd have to speak eventually. One evening, as I sorted through paperwork in the living room, she entered quietly. Her arms were crossed, and she stood in place for a moment, clearly gathering her thoughts. Her expression was troubled, and she bit her lip, a nervous habit I hadn't seen in years. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and strained, confessing that she hadn't been entirely truthful about the open marriage. She admitted there was someone, Matt, a co-worker she'd been talking to for months. Though she insisted nothing physical had happened, the emotional connection had been enough to make her question everything. She described how their conversations had grown too personal, crossing boundaries she now regretted. Her words tumbled out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would make the weight of them easier to bear. She confessed that she had pushed for the open marriage not to strengthen our relationship, but to justify her feelings for him and perhaps test whether there was something more. I listened without interrupting, letting her lay bare the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. It was clear she hadn't anticipated the emotional fallout. Her guilt was etched into every word, especially when she admitted she had stopped things with Matt before they escalated, but too late to undo the damage. She explained how she had thought this arrangement would make things feel less wrong, that opening the marriage would ease her guilt and perhaps even distract me from noticing the changes in her behavior. Now, she couldn't escape the weight of her choices. As she wiped away tears, her voice cracked with apologies, a desperate attempt to salvage what was left. She said she had never wanted to hurt me or jeopardize our life together, but her actions had spiraled beyond her control. I let her words hang in the air for a long moment before responding. The betrayal was palpable, and part of me wanted to unleash my anger, to let her feel the depth of what she'd done. But I held back, staying calm. Looking at her, I saw the cracks she was desperately trying to hold together. This wasn't just about Matt or her guilt, it was about the fragile foundation of our relationship, one she'd shaken to its core. I stood and walked past her, leaving her to face the reality she'd created. Emily was left sobbing in the silence, the consequences of her choices finally coming into full view. Emily's confession hung between us like a storm cloud, shadowing every interaction. The days that followed were fraught with tension, her attempts at normalcy falling flat. She moved through the house quietly, almost as though she feared disturbing the fragile truce between us. I didn't speak much, choosing instead to focus on my routines. It wasn't out of malice but necessity. Processing her betrayal required distance, and I wasn't ready to offer her the forgiveness she seemed desperate for. She tried to make amends in subtle ways, preparing my favorite meals, leaving the house spotless, and even attempting to join me at the gym one morning. But her efforts only deepened the divide. They felt less like genuine attempts at repair and more like a plea for reassurance that things weren't broken beyond repair. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the dining table, her laptop closed in front of her. She had a piece of paper in her hands, folded and refolded so many times it was soft at the edges. She glanced up when I walked in, her face pale. "I wrote it all down," she said quietly, sliding the paper across the table toward me. I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch as I set down my bag and took a seat. The letter outlined everything, her feelings for Matt, her guilt, and the fear that had driven her decisions. She admitted to being swept up in the attention he gave her, the way he made her feel noticed in a way she claimed she hadn't felt in years. As I read, I could feel her watching me, waiting for a reaction. The words on the page were raw and unpolished, a glimpse into the turmoil she had been hiding. She ended with a plea, asking for a chance to rebuild what she'd almost destroyed. When I finally folded the letter and set it down, she exhaled shakily, as if bracing herself for whatever came next. "You had your chance to be honest before all this," I said, my tone measured. "Now it's not just about fixing things, it's about proving that you even want to." Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded and wiped at her tears. It was clear she understood the gravity of the situation, even if she didn't know how to begin repairing it. That night, I moved into the guest room, needing space to think. The sound of her muffled sobs drifted down the hallway, but I didn't go to her. This wasn't something I could fix for her, nor was it something she could undo with apologies and promises. Emily had shattered the trust we'd built, and while I wasn't sure what the future held, I knew one thing for certain: things would never go back to the way they were. The fallout of her choices would ripple through every part of our lives, and it was up to her to show me if there was anything left worth saving. After moving into the guest room, I focused on giving myself the space to think. The following days were a blur of quiet tension. Emily tiptoed around me, trying to gauge my mood without being too obvious. Her guilt was palpable, but I wasn't ready to engage. I needed clarity, not just about her actions, but about what I was willing to accept moving forward. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen as I rinsed a plate after dinner. She was hesitant, her voice soft as she asked if we could sit down and talk. I nodded, setting the plate aside and following her to the dining table. She sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It took her a moment to begin, but when she did, her words were halting, almost fragile. She wanted to know what she could do to make things right, to fix what she'd broken. Her eyes searched mine for any sign of hope, but I kept my expression neutral. I let her finish before responding. "If we're going to move forward, there are going to be rules," I said evenly. "Non-negotiable ones." Her head nodded quickly, almost desperately. "Of course. Whatever you need." I listed my terms, keeping them straightforward but firm. Full transparency was the foundation. Access to her phone, her social media, and any communication she had with coworkers, especially Matt. Complete honesty, with no room for omissions or half-truths. If she had any lingering ties to Matt, they had to be severed immediately. As I laid it all out, her face grew pale, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she took a shaky breath and agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. She assured me she was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild trust, even if it meant giving up her privacy entirely. I studied her for a moment, her sincerity evident in her expression. But I wasn't ready to trust her words alone. "This isn't about saying the right things," I said. "It's about proving you mean them." Emily's tears began to fall as she nodded, promising to show me through her actions. She admitted she had already blocked Matt's number and deleted their conversations, but I made it clear that wasn't enough. I wanted proof, and I wanted her to take responsibility for every step of this process. That night, I stayed in the guest room again, but the tension felt slightly different. Emily's willingness to comply with my terms was a small step, but it was only the beginning. The road ahead wasn't just about rebuilding trust, it was about her demonstrating that she was ready to prioritize our relationship over her selfish impulses. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized that while I wasn't sure where this path would lead, I was determined to take control of the narrative. Emily had made her choices, and now it was my turn to decide if she could truly earn back what she had so carelessly thrown away. The next morning, I asked Emily to meet me in the living room. I needed to make sure she understood that my terms weren't suggestions, they were the bare minimum if she wanted any chance of repairing what she'd broken. She sat across from me, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, her anxiety clear in every movement. I handed her a folder containing printed screenshots of her interactions with Matt, which I had pieced together from the limited information I'd found during my quiet investigation. Her face paled as she flipped through them. "You said you blocked him," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I need to see you do it. Completely. No lingering contacts. No hidden messages." Emily nodded shakily and grabbed her phone from the coffee table. As she opened her contacts and showed me Matt's name, her hands trembled. She hit the block button and deleted the thread, turning the screen to me as proof. "It's done," she said softly, her voice cracking. But I wasn't finished. "Check your email and social media. Any connection to him has to go." She hesitated for a split second before complying, scrolling through her accounts to remove every trace of him. Watching her sever these ties felt like a small victory, though it didn't erase the damage already done. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I didn't realize how far I'd let this go." Her apology felt genuine, but I kept my guard up. "This isn't just about deleting him from your phone," I said, leaning forward. "It's about showing me every day that you're committed to fixing this. Words won't cut it anymore." She nodded, her tears falling freely. "I'll prove it to you," she said, almost pleading. For the next few days, Emily was diligent about following my rules. She kept her phone accessible at all times, sharing passwords without hesitation. Whenever a message or call came in, she made sure to show it to me before I even had to ask. It was a start, but I knew it wasn't enough. Rebuilding trust would take more than just transparency. It would require time, effort, and a level of accountability she hadn't shown in years. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Emily hesitated before speaking. "I've decided to request a transfer at work," she said, her voice quiet but steady. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Why?" She looked down at her plate, her voice trembling slightly. "Being in the same office as Matt, it doesn't feel right anymore. I can't keep working there and expect you to believe I'm serious about fixing this." Her decision caught me off guard, but it was the first tangible step she'd taken to show she was willing to change. It didn't erase the hurt, but it was something. "Good," I said simply, keeping my tone neutral. That night, I stayed in the guest room again, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of possibility. Emily was beginning to take real steps to confront the consequences of her actions, though the road ahead was still long. For now, I could only watch and wait, letting her actions determine whether there was anything left to salvage. Over the next week, Emily followed through on her promise to distance herself from Matt and take steps toward rebuilding trust. True to her word, she submitted a transfer request at work and began actively looking for positions at other companies. She kept me informed at every step, showing me emails and updating me on her progress without being asked. Though her efforts were clear, I remained cautious. Trust, once broken, doesn't return overnight. I observed her closely, looking for any cracks in her resolve, any signs that her remorse was superficial. But Emily stayed consistent, transparent with her phone, open about her whereabouts, and quick to share her thoughts without hesitation. One evening, as we sat across from each other during dinner, she asked if I'd consider moving back into the bedroom. Her voice was hesitant, and she avoided my eyes as she spoke. "I don't think we're ready for that yet," I said, my tone measured. She nodded, her disappointment visible, but she didn't argue. Instead, she focused on finishing her meal in silence. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but she seemed to accept that rebuilding our relationship wouldn't happen on her timeline. A few days later, Emily surprised me by organizing a couples therapy session. She left a printed confirmation on the kitchen counter, detailing the appointment and encouraging me to join her. It wasn't something I'd expected, but it was a step forward. When the day came, I found myself sitting across from her in a quiet, neutral office. The therapist began by asking Emily to explain why she'd scheduled the session, and she spoke openly about her guilt, her betrayal, and her determination to fix what she'd broken. Her words were raw, and her tears came freely as she admitted to how far she'd let things spiral out of control. When it was my turn to speak, I laid everything out honestly. My anger, my hurt, and my doubts about whether I could ever fully trust her again. Emily listened intently, her expression filled with remorse. The session was difficult, but it also felt like a step in the right direction. For the first time, we weren't just talking around the problem. We were confronting it directly, with no room for half-truths or excuses. At the end of the session, the therapist suggested we start small, practicing open communication daily and setting aside time each week to discuss our progress. Emily agreed enthusiastically, and though I was more reserved, I knew it was worth a try. That night, Emily thanked me for attending. Her gratitude seemed genuine, but I still kept my guard up. Progress was being made, but I wasn't ready to let my defenses down completely. As I lay in the guest room once again, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Emily was taking real steps to make amends, and while the pain of her betrayal still lingered, the path forward felt less uncertain. For the first time in weeks, I began to think there might be something worth saving after all. The routines Emily and I established after therapy began to stabilize our interactions, but it was far from easy. While she threw herself into demonstrating her commitment, I remained guarded, testing her resolve and watching for any signs of insincerity. Emily took the weekly discussions seriously, often initiating them herself. She'd sit across from me, her notebook open, ready to address any concerns I had. She shared everything: work updates, the status of her job transfer, even the occasional intrusive thought about how she could have acted differently. It was an unfiltered honesty I hadn't seen from her in years, but I wasn't ready to fully trust it yet. One afternoon, as I returned from the gym, she was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She greeted me with a smile that didn't feel forced, though there was still a hint of nervousness in her expression. "I called HR today," she said, stirring a pot on the stove. "They're finalizing my transfer paperwork. I should be out of my current department by the end of the month." "That's good," I replied, setting my gym bag down. I kept my tone neutral, not giving her the satisfaction of knowing I was quietly impressed. She nodded, her relief evident as she focused on chopping vegetables. I know it's just a small step, she added, but I hope it helps show I'm serious. Later that evening, Emily suggested we go for a walk together, something we hadn't done in months. I agreed, curious to see what she had in mind. As we strolled through the quiet neighborhood, she spoke about wanting to rebuild not just trust, but the connection we'd lost long before her betrayal. I miss us, she said, her voice soft but sincere. The way we used to laugh, how we could talk about anything. I know I'm the one who ruined that, but I want to find it again, even if it takes time. Her vulnerability caught me off guard, but I didn't let it show. It's not just about time, I said, my tone steady. It's about effort, consistency. Words don't fix things. Actions do. She nodded, her shoulders slightly slumped as she absorbed my words. I understand, she said quietly. The walk ended without fanfare, but the gesture lingered in my mind. She was trying, truly trying, and while part of me appreciated her effort, the other part couldn't let go of the lingering doubt. The next day, during our scheduled discussion, Emily brought up an idea that surprised me. She suggested we spend a weekend away, just the two of us, to focus on rebuilding without the distractions of daily life. I want to show you I'm serious, she said, her tone earnest. And I think we need to step out of this space for a little while to figure out what's next. I hesitated, considering the implications. A part of me wanted to agree, to take a step toward mending what was broken. But another part feared it was too soon, that I wasn't ready to let down the walls I'd built. I'll think about it, I said finally, watching her reaction. She accepted my hesitation without protest, but her hope was evident. For now, I wasn't sure if I was ready to move forward, but at least she was proving she wanted to try. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. The weekend getaway Emily had suggested lingered in my mind over the following days. It was a bold move, but it carried the weight of what we both knew. Our relationship was at a crossroads, and the time for half measures was over. I agreed to her idea, though cautiously, making it clear that the trip wasn't a guarantee of anything but a chance to see if there was still something worth saving. We packed lightly and drove to a cabin 2 hours away, tucked near a quiet lake surrounded by autumn-colored trees. The air was crisp, the kind that made you breathe deeper and feel everything a little more sharply. It was beautiful, but the tension between us muted the charm. The first day passed with polite small talk. We went for a hike, ate a simple dinner, and sat silently by the fireplace. Emily tried to bridge the gap by reminiscing about happier times, our first vacation, funny mishaps from early in our marriage. But I remained non-committal, unsure if I was ready to engage with the memories she was trying to revive. That night, as we sat by the fire, she finally addressed the elephant in the room. Her voice trembled as she acknowledged the pain she'd caused and how much she regretted her choices. She admitted she had been selfish, chasing validation without considering the consequences. I didn't just hurt you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I betrayed everything we built together. And I hate myself for it. Her words felt genuine, but I stayed quiet, letting her speak without interruption. She confessed that the months of dishonesty had eaten away at her, and she had feared it was too late to salvage anything. She pleaded not just for forgiveness, but for a chance to prove she could be better. For me, for us. The raw emotion in her voice was hard to ignore, but my own hurt hadn't dissipated. I told her as much, laying bare the doubts and anger that still lingered. I explained that while her efforts had shown me she was willing to fight for us, I couldn't ignore the cracks she'd left in our foundation. The conversation stretched late into the night, neither of us holding back. For the first time in months, it felt like we were truly communicating. No half-truths, no pretense. It was exhausting, but it also felt necessary, like we were finally addressing the damage head-on. By the time the trip ended, we had reached a fragile understanding. I told her I wasn't ready to fully forgive, but I was willing to take small steps forward, provided she continued proving her commitment. Emily accepted this without hesitation, promising to do whatever it took to rebuild the trust she had shattered. As we drove home, the weight in the car felt lighter, though not entirely gone. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, there was a sliver of hope. Whether that hope would be enough to heal what had been broken remained to be seen, but at least we were no longer running from the truth. Emily had made her choice to fight for us, and I had made mine to let her try. The rest would depend on time and whether the scars she left could ever truly fade.